Before we begin, let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever watched someone discard a treasure simply because they didn't know its value? Click subscribe and tell me in the comments as you watch. Because this story may change the way you see love, pride, and regret forever. The rain had been falling since dawn, a thin grey curtain over the city that blurred glass towers into smudges of wealth and ambition. Inside a modest apartment on the edge of downtown, Lydia Hale folded the same blue dress 3 times before placing it carefully into a worn suitcase. She moved slowly, as if every motion cost her something. The apartment was almost empty now. No framed photos on the walls, no shared mugs in the kitchen. Just echoes, the kind that linger after love has already packed its bags and left without saying goodbye. Lydia paused by the window, watching cars glide past below. Her reflection stared back at her, 32 years old, soft-featured, dark eyes dulled by too many apologies she never should have made. She wore a plain cardigan, the sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs. Clothes chosen for comfort, not attention. Clothes that had made her invisible long before, today. On the small dining table lay a single envelope. Divorce settlement. She hadn't opened it yet. Not because she expected much, she didn't, but because opening it felt like confirming what her heart already knew, that after 8 years of marriage, this was all she was worth to him now. A knock sounded at the door, 3 sharp raps, impatient, familiar. Lydia inhaled, steadying herself, then opened it. Caleb Wright stood in the hallway, immaculate as always. Tailored charcoal suit, gold watch glinting against his wrist, hair perfectly styled, not a strand disturbed by the rain. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and certainty. Once, that smell had made her feel safe. Now, it just reminded her how far away he already was. "You're almost done?" Caleb asked, glancing past her into the apartment as if checking off items on a list. "Yes," Lydia said quietly. "Just the last few things." His eyes flicked to the suitcase, then away. "Good. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. "Of course you do," she thought. They stood there in silence, a canyon of unspoken words stretching between them. This was the man she had supported when he was broke and angry at the world. The man who once cried into her shoulder at 2 a.m., whispering that without her, he would amount to nothing. Now he barely looked at her. "I left the papers on the table," he said. "My lawyer said everything's standard." Standard, a word that felt like a dismissal of her entire existence. Lydia nodded. "I'll sign them." Caleb hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then added almost defensively, "This is for the best. We've grown incompatible." Incompatible. Not poor, not boring, not embarrassing, just incompatible. She forced a small smile. "If that's how you feel." He checked his watch. There it was, the final proof. He wasn't leaving because he no longer loved her. He had left long before, when her simplicity stopped matching his ambition, when her quiet dignity didn't fit into boardrooms and power lunches, and when his boss noticed him. Across the city, in the top floor of a glass tower that pierced the clouds, Vanessa Crowell stood before a wall of windows, her heels clicking softly against marble floors. The city bent beneath her gaze. Roads, buildings, people, all moving in rhythms she controlled. She was power-dressed in silk and steel. Vanessa adjusted her blazer and turned to her assistant. "Has Caleb finalized everything?" "Yes, Miss Crowell. He's divorcing her today." A slow smile curved her lips. "Good," Vanessa said. "I don't entertain complications." Back in the apartment, Lydia picked up the envelope and finally opened it. The numbers were small, painfully small. No house, no savings, just enough to help her transition, as if her entire life could be reduced to a temporary inconvenience. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. "Lydia," Caleb said suddenly, his voice softer now, uncertain. "You'll be fine. You're strong. She looked up at him then. Really looked, and in that moment she realized something heartbreaking and freeing all at once. He believed that. He truly believed she was leaving with nothing. He had no idea that the woman standing before him, quiet, unadorned, unassuming, was the sole, unknowing heir to an offshore trust created decades ago by a grandfather she barely remembered. A trust managed by lawyers who had been searching for her for years. A trust worth $500 million. Lydia didn't know, but fate did. She signed the papers. The pen scratched across the page. Final and irreversible. "There," she said softly. "I wish you happiness, Caleb." For the first time, something like discomfort flickered across his face. "Take care of yourself," he said. Then he turned and walked away. The door closed with a quiet click. Lydia stood alone. No tears came, just a strange stillness, as if the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. She lifted her suitcase, stepped into the hallway, and locked the door behind her. As she walked away from the life she thought she'd lost, neither she nor the man who had abandoned her knew the truth. That this divorce wasn't her ending. It was his mistake. If you were Lydia, would you walk away quietly, or would you want the truth to come out one day? Tell me what you would do in the comments section. Subscribe and click the like button. Lydia Hale did not cry as she stepped out into the rain. The sky had opened wider now, heavy drops soaking through her cardigan within seconds. She didn't hurry. There was nowhere left to rush to. The city swallowed her, easily. Another figure moving through the blur of umbrellas and headlights. She dragged her suitcase toward the bus stop 2 blocks away, its wheels rattling over cracked pavement. Each sound echoed too loudly in her chest. 8 years. That was how long it took to become disposable. The bus shelter was empty when she arrived. Lydia sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping through her clothes, and finally allowed herself to exhale. Not a sob. Just a long, shaky breath she'd been holding since the first night Caleb slept facing the wall. She pulled her phone from her pocket. No messages. Not from him. Not from anyone. Her thumb hovered over a contact she hadn't touched in years. Aunt Margaret. The woman who had raised her briefly after her parents' accident. The woman who used to talk about old family money Lydia always thought was exaggerated nostalgia. She hesitated, then shook her head and slipped the phone away. What would I even say? I've been divorced, have nowhere to go. Pride, she realized too late, could survive even when love didn't. Across the city, Caleb Wright stood in the elevator of Crowell Industries, adjusting his tie as the numbers climbed. His reflection stared back at him, confident, composed, victorious. Divorce finalized, promotion imminent, future secured, or so he believed. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, a world Lydia had never belonged to. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished marble, quiet power humming beneath every conversation. Vanessa Crowell waited in her office, one leg crossed elegantly over the other as she scanned a document. "Come in," she said without looking up. Caleb stepped inside. "It's done," he said. Vanessa finally raised her eyes, studying him the way one might examine a newly acquired asset. "And she signed without issue?" "Yes." "No demands?" He hesitated. "She's not that kind of person." Vanessa's lips curved slightly. "That's why this worked." She rose and walked past him, her presence commanding, deliberate. "You'll move fast now," she continued. "People talk. Optics matter. A public announcement in a few weeks. Until then, discretion." Caleb nodded. This was the life he had worked toward. The life Lydia could never have kept up with. Still, something tugged at him. "She'll be okay," he said, more to himself than to Vanessa. Vanessa stopped walking and turned. "Caleb," she said coolly, "people like her don't break. They fade, and fading is far less tragic than failure. He swallowed and said nothing. That evening, Lydia arrived at a small boarding house on the south side of the city. The landlady barely glanced at her as she paid for a week in cash. Room 12 was narrow, a bed, a desk, a window facing a brick wall, but it was quiet. Lydia sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at her hands. Hands that had cooked meals, held dreams, signed away marriage. She lay back fully clothed and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the night, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned and answered hesitantly. Hello? There was a pause, then a man's voice, measured, professional. Ms. Lydia Hale, my name is Thomas Green. I'm calling from Whitmore and Klein Legal Group. Her heart thudded. Yes. We've been trying to reach you for quite some time. It concerns the Hale family trust. Silence. I think, the man continued carefully, it's best we speak in person. Are you available tomorrow? Lydia sat up slowly, confusion threading through her exhaustion. What trust? She asked. Another pause, this one heavier. Miss Hale, Thomas said, you may want to sit down. She already was. And somewhere across the city, Caleb Wright slept peacefully beside ambition, unaware that the woman he had discarded as poor had just been found, and that the world was about to turn upside down. Do you believe destiny waits until the exact moment you're broken? Before it reveals the truth, comment and share your thoughts below. Please like and click the subscribe button. Lydia barely slept. The night passed in fragments. Half dreams where Caleb's voice echoed down endless hallways, where doors closed before she could reach them. When morning came, grey light crept through the thin curtains, settling on the unfamiliar room like a question without an answer. The phone call replayed in her mind. The Hale family trust. She showered quickly, hands shaking as warm water ran over her shoulders. She dressed in the simplest clothes she owned, black slacks, a cream blouse, flats worn smooth at the soles. Not because she wanted to look professional, but because she wanted to disappear. At exactly 10 a.m., a black sedan pulled up outside the boarding house. Lydia froze at the window. That car didn't belong to her world. She hesitated, then grabbed her handbag and stepped outside. The driver opened the door without speaking. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and restraint. No one spoke during the drive. The city shifted as they moved. Shops gave way to towers, brick to glass. By the time the car stopped in front of a high-rise with a discreet brass plaque reading Whitmore and Klein, Lydia's pulse was pounding in her ears. Inside, the office was quiet, in a way money always was. Thomas Green stood as she entered the conference room. He was older, silver-haired, eyes sharp but not unkind. Ms. Hale, he said gently, thank you for coming. She sat, folding her hands together to hide the tremor. I think there's been a mistake, Lydia said before he could speak. I don't have family money. I grew up ordinary. Thomas nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. Your grandfather, Henry Hale, did not live an ordinary life, he said, sliding a thick folder across the table. He built one of the largest private shipping networks in the Atlantic before selling it quietly in the 1980s. Lydia stared at the folder, but didn't open it. My parents never talked about him. They were estranged, Thomas said. When they passed, the trust activated a long-term search protocol. Unfortunately, your name changed after marriage. It delayed us. Marriage. The word landed heavily. Thomas continued. The trust was designed to remain sealed until the sole heir was found, or until her 32nd birthday. Lydia's breath caught. I turned 32 last week. Yes, Thomas said softly, which is why the funds are now legally yours. He slid another document forward. Numbers filled the page. Too many zeros. Lydia's vision blurred. This can't be right. It is, Thomas said. $500 million, conservatively valued, liquid and diversified. The room tilted. She laughed once, short, disbelieving. I was just divorced. Yesterday. Thomas watched her carefully. I'm aware. Her head snapped up. You are? Yes, which brings us to a complication. He paused. Because your divorce was finalized before the trust was disclosed, your former husband has no legal claim. The words sank in slowly. Caleb, Vanessa, nothing. Lydia pressed her palm flat against the table, grounding herself. So I lost everything yesterday, she whispered. And today you're telling me I have everything, Thomas finished. Her chest tightened, not with joy, but with something sharper, grief. Because all this meant was that Caleb had left her when she truly had nothing, and would have stayed if he'd known. Tears finally came, slipping silently down her cheeks. I don't know how to be this person, she said. I don't even know who I am anymore. Thomas softened. You don't have to decide today. Wealth doesn't change who you are. It reveals who others are. Across town, Caleb sat in Vanessa Crowell's office again, this time with champagne between them. To new beginnings, Vanessa said, lifting her glass. Caleb smiled, but the taste felt wrong. He checked his phone, an old habit he hadn't broken yet. No message from Lydia. A strange discomfort crept into his chest. That evening, Lydia stood alone in a luxury apartment she didn't remember choosing. The silence was overwhelming. No shouting, no judgment, just space. She set her suitcase down slowly. For the first time since the divorce, she whispered aloud, "He didn't love me." Not because she was poor, but because he thought she was. She walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once crushed her beneath its indifference. Something shifted inside her, not anger, clarity. She would not chase revenge, but she would never again beg for a place at a table she owned. The next day, Lydia Hale did not wake up wealthy. She woke up confused. Morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows she still didn't feel entitled to. The bed was too large, the silence too deep. Even the air smelled different, cleaner, lighter, as though it belonged to someone else. For a moment, she forgot. Then memory rushed back in. The office, the numbers, the truth. Lydia sat up slowly, pressing her feet to the plush carpet. Her reflection stared back at her from a mirrored wall. Same woman, same tired eyes. No crown, no transformation, just Lydia. Nothing has changed, she whispered, and yet everything had. At Whitmore and Klein later that morning, Thomas Green watched her pace the conference room, like a woman trying to outrun her own shadow. I don't want anyone to know, Lydia said firmly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Anyone? Especially my ex-husband. A pause. That is unusual, he said carefully. So was being loved only when I was useful, she replied. She stopped pacing and met his gaze. I don't want revenge. I don't want headlines. I just want time. Time to decide who I am without someone measuring my worth. Thomas nodded. We can structure anonymity, shell entities, a holding name. Do it, Lydia said. Let the money exist without me. As she signed document after document, her hands no longer shook. Across the city, resistance took a different shape. Caleb Wright stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his cufflinks for the third time. Vanessa was already downstairs waiting for him, tapping her phone impatiently. You're distracted, she had said over breakfast. I'm fine, he replied too quickly. But he wasn't. Since the divorce, something felt off. Lydia should have called. She should have asked for help. She should have needed him, but she hadn't. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. At work, Caleb tried to bury himself in numbers and meetings, but his focus fractured. He, Shiusaina, found himself rereading emails, missing cues, staring out windows as if expecting to see her walking below with that old blue suitcase. Vanessa noticed everything. "You regret it," she said later, pouring herself a drink in her office. "No," Caleb said immediately. "I move forward." "Then stop looking backward," she said coolly. "Women like Lydia cling. Silence is just another tactic." But her words didn't comfort him. They irritated him. That evening, Lydia sat in a quiet cafe miles away from the business district. She wore simple clothes again, no jewelry, no signs of the fortune waiting patiently behind legal walls. The waitress smiled at her like she mattered. That alone felt like healing. Her phone buzzed. Caleb. Her heart jumped. Traitorously. She stared at the screen until it stopped vibrating. She didn't answer. Across town, Caleb stared at his phone in disbelief. No response. For the first time since he'd known her, Lydia had chosen silence over him. Something sharp twisted in his chest. Meanwhile, the world continued turning, unaware that two lives were orbiting the same truth from opposite sides. Vanessa announced their engagement at a private dinner 2 weeks later. Applause filled the room. Caleb smiled for cameras, but that night, alone, he dreamed of Lydia standing in the rain, looking at him with eyes that no longer asked for love. And Lydia, she dreamed of nothing at all, only calm, only space, only the quiet resistance of a woman learning she no longer needed permission to exist. Life had a cruel sense of timing. Lydia learned this on a Thursday morning, standing outside a modest community center on the east side of the city, staring up at a faded banner that read, "Widows and Women Rebuilding. Fundraising Gala Planning Meeting." She almost turned around. Almost. But something inside her, stronger than fear now, kept her rooted. This was the one thing she hadn't changed. Long before the divorce, long before the fortune, Lydia had volunteered here every month. It was the only place she'd ever felt useful without conditions. Inside, folding chairs scraped softly against the floor as women gathered, laughing, arguing gently, sharing stories stitched together by survival. "Lydia," Mrs. Patterson called out, "I was hoping you'd come back." "I almost didn't," Lydia admitted with a small smile. "Well, I'm glad you did. We've got a situation." That word always meant trouble. Minutes later, Lydia sat at the head of a table cluttered with papers. "Our main sponsor backed out," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Last minute, corporate nonsense." Lydia frowned. "So what do we do?" "We scramble," another woman sighed, "unless a miracle walks in." The door opened, and fate walked straight through it. Caleb Wright entered the room, followed by two sharply dressed associates. Lydia's breath caught. Time slowed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough for every sound to blur. The scrape of chairs, the hum of lights, the faint echo of a life she thought she'd left behind. Caleb stopped short when he saw her. Their eyes locked. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands cheerfully. "You must be Mr. Wright. Thank you for coming. Lydia here coordinates most of our events." Caleb swallowed. "Lydia," he said quietly. She stood, smoothing her cardigan like armor. "Caleb." There it was, the first word they'd spoken to each other since the divorce. Forced proximity had arrived, uninvited and unavoidable. "I didn't know you still volunteered here," he said. "I didn't know you sponsored charities like this," she replied evenly. Neither was lying. The meeting continued, but tension sat between them like a third presence. Caleb barely heard the proposals, the numbers. He kept glancing at Lydia. How calm she looked, how steady. She wasn't broken. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. After the meeting, Mrs. Patterson beamed. "We're saved. Mr. Wright's company will cover the funding gap." Lydia turned sharply. "What?" Caleb hesitated. It's manageable. Mrs. Patterson squeezed Lydia's hand. Looks like you two were meant to work together again. The words landed heavier than intended. Outside, rain threatened again. The sky hung low and grey, familiar. Caleb cleared his throat. Can we talk? Lydia considered saying no. Instead, she nodded. They walked in silence to a nearby cafe, the same one Lydia had visited weeks earlier. Fate, again, had a sense of humour. They sat across from each other. You look well, Caleb said finally. So do you, she replied. Another pause. I've been worried, he admitted. You disappeared. I didn't disappear, Lydia said softly. I just stopped reaching. That stung. Caleb leaned forward. I never meant to hurt you. She met his gaze steadily. Intent doesn't erase impact. Silence filled the space between them. I thought you'd struggle, he confessed quietly. I thought you'd need help. And if I had, she asked. He didn't answer, because he knew the truth. Something had shifted in Lydia, not just independence, but dignity. It wrapped around her words, her posture. She no longer tried to prove anything. I'm glad the center has its funding, she said, standing. That's what matters. Lydia, he began. She paused but didn't turn back. Yes? I hope you're happy. She considered the word. I'm learning, she said. And for the first time, Caleb realized something terrifying. He no longer knew her. And the woman standing before him, quiet, composed, unknowingly powerful, was someone he might never deserve again. The city remembered things people tried to forget. Lydia realized this as she stood before a narrow brick building tucked between a closed bookstore and a laundromat that smelled of soap and old quarters. The sign above the door was chipped, the letters fading. Hale and Son Shipping, EST. 1956. Her chest tightened. Thomas Green stood beside her, hands folded behind his back. Your grandfather refused to sell this property, even after he sold the company. Said it was where everything began. Lydia pushed the door open. Dust danced in the air as sunlight filtered through grimy windows. Wooden crates lined the walls. Old ledgers sat stacked on a desk, their spines cracked with age. It doesn't look like $500 million, she whispered. Thomas smiled gently. Most legacies don't. They spent the afternoon sorting through fragments of a life Lydia had never known. Photographs of ships, letters written in careful handwriting, documents marked confidential. Then she found it. A small envelope tucked inside a ledger. Her name, written decades ago. Hands trembling, Lydia opened it. To my granddaughter, if you're reading this, it means I failed to protect your parents the way I should have. I built this fortune not to make you powerful, but so you would never be forced to stay where you weren't loved. Tears blurred the words. I stayed, Lydia whispered, for years. Thomas watched her quietly. That doesn't make you weak, he said. It makes you human. Meanwhile, across the city, Caleb sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights blinked like distant warnings beyond the glass. He hadn't told Vanessa where he was. He hadn't told her why he couldn't stop thinking about Lydia. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph he'd kept without knowing why. Lydia on their first anniversary. Laughing, hair pulled back loosely, eyes bright with belief. He remembered saying then, "We'll build something together." Somewhere along the way, together had become me. His phone buzzed. Vanessa. He ignored it. Instead, he poured a drink he didn't want and stared at the city that had rewarded him for leaving love behind. Back at the warehouse, Lydia found another letter, this one addressed to her mother. Never tell her about the trust until she knows who she is without it. Lydia closed her eyes. I never knew him, she said, but he knew me. That night, she sat alone in her apartment. The letters spread across the table like puzzle pieces, finally forming a picture. She wasn't lucky. She was prepared. Prepared by a man who had believed she deserved more than survival. Her phone buzzed. Caleb again. This time she answered. "Lydia," he said, relief flooding his voice. "I've been meaning to call." "I know," she replied calmly. He hesitated. "I think I made a mistake." She closed her eyes. "You made a choice," she said. "There's a difference." Silence. "I miss you," he admitted. Her heart ached, but it didn't break. "I miss who I was before I believed I wasn't enough," she said softly. "I'm not going back to that." He swallowed hard. "Can we meet? Just talk?" She thought of her grandfather's words. "Never stay where you aren't loved." "Yes," she said finally, "but not for the reasons you think." They agreed to meet in 2 days. Lydia ended the call and stood by the window, watching the city breathe. The past had finally spoken, and it had changed everything. They met on neutral ground. Not the cafe where fate had ambushed them. Not their old apartment, now only a memory soaked in regret. Instead, Lydia chose a quiet botanical garden tucked behind the city museum. Open, public, alive with growing things. Caleb arrived early. That alone would have surprised the Lydia he once knew. He stood near a fountain, hands in his coat pockets, watching water spill endlessly over smooth stone. It reminded him uncomfortably of time, how it moved forward no matter how desperately one wished to step back. When Lydia appeared at the entrance, he felt it again. That pull. She wore a soft grey dress, simple, elegant, without effort. Her hair was loose, catching the light. No makeup beyond what made her look like herself. She didn't scan the space nervously. She walked with quiet certainty. A woman who knew she could leave at any moment. "Hi," he said when she reached him. "Hi," she replied. They walked side by side, not touching. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet, filling the gaps where words struggled to form. "I've been thinking," Caleb began, "about us, about how things went wrong." She nodded, but didn't encourage him. "I didn't wake up one day and stop loving you," he continued. "I just got scared of being ordinary, of staying small." Lydia stopped walking. She turned to him slowly. "I never asked you to stay small." "I know," he said quietly. "That's the worst part." They sat on a bench beneath a flowering tree. Petals drifted down around them, careless and beautiful. "I was tired all the time," Lydia said after a moment. "Tired of proving my worth. Tired of shrinking so you could feel taller." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't see it," he said. "Or maybe I did, and I looked away." Silence settled between them. Not hostile, not awkward, just honest. "For what it's worth," he added, "I'm proud of you. You're different." She smiled faintly. "I'm the same, just no longer afraid." Something softened in him. They talked for over an hour, about small things, safe things, books she'd been reading, projects at work, memories that no longer hurt quite as sharply when spoken aloud. For a moment, it almost felt like healing. Almost. As they stood to leave, Caleb reached out instinctively, then stopped, himself. "I don't expect anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, for not choosing you when it mattered." Lydia looked at him then, not with anger, not with longing, with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "That's enough." But as she walked away, another man watched from a distance. Ethan Cole. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He was a venture advisor Thomas Green had introduced Lydia to weeks earlier. Warm-eyed, thoughtful, unassuming in a way that felt safe rather than small. Ethan approached cautiously. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Lydia smiled genuinely. No, I was just leaving. Caleb watched as she greeted Ethan, saw the ease, the laughter, the lightness that had once belonged to him. And in that moment, he understood something devastating. Lydia wasn't healing for him. She was healing past him. As Lydia and Ethan walked away together, she felt something unfamiliar but gentle stir in her chest. Not fear, not urgency, possibility. And for the first time since the divorce, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding what had been lost. She felt like she was discovering something new. The truth has a way of surfacing when pride believes it has won. Lydia learned this on a night that should have been forgettable. She was attending a small private dinner, nothing extravagant, just a quiet gathering hosted by Whitmore and Klein for select partners and advisors. She hadn't wanted to go, but Thomas insisted. Visibility matters, he had said gently, even when you're hiding. Lydia wore a deep navy dress, elegant but restrained. No diamonds, no announcement, just presence. Ethan stood beside her, calm and reassuring, offering quiet commentary that made her smile. There was no pressure between them, only curiosity and respect. Then the room shifted. The air changed. Lydia felt it before she saw him. Caleb Wright entered the room with Vanessa Crowell on his arm. Vanessa was radiant. Red dress, sharp smile, eyes scanning the space like she owned it. And then she saw Lydia. Recognition flickered, followed by something colder. Interesting, Vanessa murmured. Your little volunteer friend. Caleb stiffened. Lydia! He hadn't expected to see her here. Not here. Before he could process the moment, Vanessa's assistant leaned in, whispering urgently. Ms. Crowell, the Hale Holdings representative, has arrived. Lydia froze. Vanessa turned sharply. Hale Holdings? Yes, the primary investor behind the new maritime acquisition. Caleb's blood ran cold. Vanessa's gaze swept the room again, this time landing on Lydia. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Ethan felt Lydia tense. Are you all right? Before Lydia could respond, Vanessa stepped forward, heels clicking against marble. Well, Vanessa said coolly, this is unexpected. Lydia met her gaze evenly. Ms. Crowell. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't realize Hale Holdings outsourced its presence. A loaded insult. The room quieted subtly, attention drawn. Caleb stepped forward. Vanessa, but she continued, eyes never leaving Lydia. Tell me, Lydia, are you here as a guest or as someone's charity project? The words landed like a slap. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's uncalled for. Vanessa ignored him. Lydia inhaled slowly. I'm here by invitation, she said calmly. Vanessa laughed lightly. Of course you are. Then she turned to the room. Perhaps someone can explain why my company is negotiating with an entity represented by... She paused deliberately. A woman who couldn't even afford to keep her marriage intact. Gasps rippled. Caleb felt the ground drop beneath him. Stop, he said sharply. Vanessa turned to him. You didn't know. Know what? Thomas Green stepped forward. Ms. Crowell, he said evenly. Allow me to clarify. Lydia Hale is not a representative of Hale Holdings. He paused. She is Hale Holdings. Silence. The kind that crushes. Vanessa's smile froze. Caleb stared at Lydia as if the room had vanished. What? He whispered. Thomas continued calmly. Ms. Hale is the sole beneficiary and controlling interest of a $500 million trust. A murmur surged through the room. Caleb's chest constricted. 500 million. The words echoed violently. Vanessa's composure cracked. That's not possible. It is, Thomas replied, and your acquisition depends entirely on her approval. Vanessa turned slowly to Lydia, eyes blazing. You lied. I never claimed anything, Lydia said quietly. You assumed. Caleb took a step toward her. disbelief etched into his face. All this time, you knew? Lydia looked at him. Really looked. No, she said softly. I found out after you left. The room faded. Caleb's voice broke. I left you because you thought I was nothing, she finished, the words sliced clean and precise. Vanessa grabbed Caleb's arm. We're leaving. But he didn't move. Was any of it real? He asked Lydia desperately. She swallowed. Yes, she said. That's what makes this hurt. Tears burned but did not fall. Vanessa hissed, You humiliated me. Lydia met her gaze calmly. You humiliated yourself. The room erupted in whispers. Caleb stood there, exposed, stripped of justification, realizing the full weight of what he had done. He had abandoned love for status, and status had just bowed to the woman he discarded. Lydia turned away. As she walked out, the sound of applause broke out. Not loud, but unmistakable. Not for the money, for her dignity. Outside, the night air hit her like a wave. Ethan caught up to her. Lydia, are you okay? She shook, her head. No, she said honestly, but I will be. Inside the building, Caleb collapsed into a chair. Vanessa stared at him with fury. This is your fault. And for the first time, he knew. She was right. After the night shattered, the world went quiet. Lydia retreated, not from fear, but from noise. Headlines buzzed for a day, then faded. 500 million was impressive, but it was her composure that lingered in memory. Still, she wanted no part of speculation or triumph. She took a train north. No entourage, no assistance. Just a single suitcase and a destination she hadn't visited since childhood. The coastal town where her parents were buried. The sea greeted her with familiar indifference. She walked the shoreline alone, shoes in hand, letting cold water numb her thoughts. The ocean didn't care who she was. That comforted her. She knelt before two weathered stones and spoke softly. I'm okay now, she said. I didn't know what you left me, but I know why. She stayed there until sunset. That night her phone rang. Caleb. She almost didn't answer. But healing, she had learned, didn't come from avoidance. It came from truth. Yes, she said. I'm not calling to explain, he said immediately. His voice sounded stripped bare. Or to ask for anything. She waited. I just needed you to know, he continued, that I see it now. Not the money. You. And I will regret my choice for the rest of my life. Silence stretched between them. I don't hate you, Lydia said finally. But I don't belong to the version of me you loved. He swallowed hard. I know. I hope one day you choose love over fear, she added gently. When the call ended, Lydia felt lighter. Back in the city, Ethan stood at the window of his apartment, staring at a message he'd written and erased 3 times. I don't want to rush you. Delete. I care about you, but I respect your space. Delete. In the end, he sent only this. Whatever you choose, I hope it's something that brings you peace. When Lydia returned 2 days later, she invited Ethan for coffee. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. I'm not looking for rescue, she said. I'm not offering it, he replied with a smile. She laughed softly. That was the moment she knew. Across town, Vanessa packed her office in silence. Deals had fallen through. Whispers followed her now. Power, she learned too late, was conditional. That evening, Lydia stood alone in her apartment again. But it felt different. She wasn't waiting. She was choosing. The morning light poured through the windows of Lydia's apartment, soft and golden, like a promise she hadn't dared to believe. She was sipping tea, notebook open, planning new ventures for Hale Holdings, when there was a quiet knock at the door. Her heart skipped, not with fear, not with old longing, but with curiosity and calm certainty. Opening the door, she found Caleb standing there, not with an air of entitlement, but with vulnerability laid bare, humility in his posture, and something new in his eyes, understanding. "May I come in?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, closing the door gently behind him. Caleb began, voice thick. "I've spent these weeks realizing I don't want to lose you again. I know I don't deserve it. I know I failed when it mattered most. But I also know that what I feel, what I've always felt, hasn't changed." Lydia studied him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders, the truth in his eyes. She remembered the rain, the suitcase, the divorce papers, and the world shifting beneath her. She remembered the realization of her fortune, the independence she had claimed, and the strength she'd discovered in solitude. "I am not the woman you left," she said, her voice firm but soft. "I will not be defined by your mistakes or your absence." "I don't expect you to forgive me," Caleb said, dropping into a chair, hands clasped. "I only want a chance to walk beside you, not behind, not above, but beside." Lydia's lips curved in a small, cautious smile. She felt the pull, the old familiarity, yes, but also the respect she had long demanded. A respect he hadn't earned before, but might now. Outside, the city hummed with life, indifferent to their reunion. But inside that apartment, a bridge was being rebuilt, plank by plank, in silence and sincerity. Hours later, they walked together through the botanical gardens, where they had first spoken after the divorce. The flowers bloomed as if marking the rebirth of something neither had dared hope for. "I've learned something important," Lydia said. "Love isn't about possession or convenience. It's about seeing someone fully and choosing them, even when it's hard." Caleb nodded. "I see you now, Lydia, fully, and I choose you." A breeze stirred petals around them. He reached out tentatively, and she took his hand. No drama, no theatrics, just honesty. "I choose me too," she whispered. They walked in silence for a while, letting the city fade around them. Later that evening, Lydia hosted a private gathering for a few trusted friends. Mrs. Patterson, Thomas Green, and yes, even Ethan, who smiled warmly, content to see her at peace. Caleb stood beside her, no longer a man of entitlement, but a partner willing to learn and grow. Vanessa Crowell's empire moved on without them, and for the first time, Lydia realized that wealth alone had never defined her victory. The real triumph was reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her heart. As night fell, Lydia looked out at the city skyline. Caleb's hand found hers again, warm and steady. "Did we really make it?" he asked, voice hushed. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "We did. Love at last. Unexpected, yes, but ours." A soft chime from her phone reminded her of a message from Ethan. "I'm happy you're happy. That's enough." Lydia put the phone down, turning fully to Caleb. The mistakes, the heartbreak, the wealth, all of it paled before the clarity she now held. She had chosen herself, chosen love again, and chosen someone who had finally seen her worth, not for her fortune, but for her heart. Outside, the city carried on, as always. But inside that apartment, the story had a perfect ending. Two hearts, battered but unbroken, beating together in unison. The woman who was once thought poor had reclaimed her power. The man who thought he had lost her forever had finally learned what it meant to truly value love. And as they stood together, hands entwined, Lydia whispered softly, almost to herself, "Some treasures can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in courage, and in choosing love when it's hardest." Caleb kissed her hand, tender, reverent, and in that simple gesture, every moment of pain, every tear shed, every heartbreak endured, transformed into a triumph that no fortune could ever surpass. When love at last emerges and everything falls into place. Have you ever realized someone's true worth too late? Or discovered strength you didn't know you had? Comment below. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from.